The boardroom fell silent as Gabriel Montanari stood at the head of the table, his hands steady, his voice cold as winter steel. "Gentlemen, I believe you're familiar with the concept of hostile takeovers." Across from him sat Vincent Rossini and his uncle Antonio, the same men who'd ordered the hit on his mother 6 years ago. The same men who thought a grieving 7-year-old boy would simply fade away into irrelevance. They were wrong. "Mr. Montanari," Vincent's voice cracked slightly. "We can negotiate." "The time for negotiation," Gabriel interrupted, sliding a folder across the mahogany surface, "ended the moment you decided my family was expendable. But this story doesn't start with victory. It starts with a little boy who stopped eating because every meal reminded him that love could be stolen away without warning. It starts with grief so profound that even the most powerful man in New York stood helpless before his son's silent rebellion. And it starts with a woman who understood that sometimes, the only way to heal a broken heart is to cook it back to life." Opening title card: "Some recipes can save more than hunger. Some recipes can save a family." ACT 1, The Empty Castle, 0:45 to 3:30, "Let me tell you about the loneliest sound in the world. It's not silence. It's the echo of a child's fork against an untouched plate in a penthouse that overlooks all of Manhattan but feels like a prison." 7-year-old Nico Montanari sat at a dining table built for 20, surrounded by crystal and gold and every luxury money could buy. The chef had prepared pan-seared Chilean sea bass with microgreens and a reduction that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. Nico stared at it like it was poison. "Please, figlio mio," Gabriel's voice carried the weight of a man who commanded armies but couldn't command his son to take a single bite. "You have to eat something." 6 months. 6 months since Sofia Montanari had closed her eyes for the last time, her body finally surrendering to the cancer that had ravaged her from the inside out. 6 months since Nico had eaten a full meal. The doctors said he was physically healthy. The therapists said he was processing trauma. The 5 nannies who'd come and gone said he was impossible. But nobody understood what Gabriel understood in the dark hours of the night when he stood outside his son's door and listened to him cry. Nico wasn't refusing food. He was refusing to feel anything that reminded him his mother was gone forever. And Gabriel? He was drowning in the same grief, buried under the weight of running an empire while watching his son disappear one skipped meal at a time. "Mr. Montanari." Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who'd been with the family since before Nico was born, approached with careful steps. In her world, interrupting Gabriel Montanari during a crisis was like poking a sleeping dragon. "The new nanny is here." Gabriel's jaw clenched. "The 6th one." "Perhaps," Mrs. Chen said softly, "the 6th time is the charm." But as Gabriel stood and straightened his tie, preparing to meet yet another well-meaning woman who would inevitably fail, he had no idea that everything was about to change. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive with fanfare and announcements. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wearing a simple black dress, holding the hand of an 8-year-old girl, carrying secrets and debts and a grandmother's recipe for osso buco that would resurrect the dead. ACT 2, Enter the Catalyst, 3:30 to 8:15, Nina Moreau's hands were shaking as she stepped out of the taxi onto 5th Avenue. Not from fear, though God knew she had plenty of reasons to be afraid. $60,000 in debt. 3 months until the collectors seized everything. A daughter who deserved better than a mother drowning in her dead father's medical bills. No, Nina's hands shook because she recognized the building. She'd seen it in the newspapers, always connected to words like, alleged, under investigation, organized crime. The Montanari name wasn't just wealthy, it was dangerous. And Nina was about to walk her 8-year-old daughter straight into the lion's den because she had no other choice. "Mama," Luna whispered, pressing close to her side as they entered the lobby. "It's so big." "I know, baby." Nina smoothed down her dress, the nicest thing she owned, purchased from a thrift store 3 years ago. "Remember, you stay in the staff quarters while Mama works. Maybe you'll make a friend." The elevator ride felt like ascending to heaven or hell, Nina wasn't sure which. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world that didn't seem real. Marble floors. Crystal chandeliers. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Central Park that belonged in magazines, not real life. But despite all the luxury, the space felt cold. Empty. Like a mausoleum pretending to be a home. Miss Moreau. The voice made her turn, and Nina's breath caught. Gabriel Montanari stood in the doorway of his study, and every newspaper photo she'd seen hadn't prepared her for the reality of him. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. Eyes like a storm about to break. A suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year. But it was the exhaustion in his face that struck her. The look of a man who could buy anything except the one thing he needed most. Mr. Montanari. Nina fought to keep her voice steady. Thank you for this opportunity. His gaze shifted to Luna, and Nina's heart sank. She hadn't mentioned Luna in the interview because single mothers rarely got hired for live-in positions. You didn't mention a daughter. I can make other arrangements if, no. He held up a hand. It's fine. Nico could use the company. His expression softened fractionally. How old? 8, sir. Same age as my son. Something flickered across Gabrielle's face, pain, hope, resignation, all at once. Mrs. Chen will show you to your quarters. Nico is in his room. He. The most powerful man in New York struggled to find words. He doesn't talk much anymore. And then Nina saw him. The boy appeared at the top of the curved staircase like a ghost, small, dark-haired, with eyes too old for his 7 years. He descended slowly, one careful step at a time, like someone who'd learned that the world was full of trapdoors. Nico, Gabrielle called gently. Come meet Miss Nina. The boy studied her with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. Not the curiosity of childhood, the wariness of someone who'd already learned that people leave. Nina crouched to his eye level, understanding instinctively that this child needed to be met as an equal, not patronized. Hello, Nico. This is my daughter, Luna. She's 8, just like you were not long ago. Luna peeked out from behind Nina's legs, offering a shy wave. Nico looked at Luna, then back at Nina. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but devastatingly direct. Are you going to leave too? The question hit Nina like a physical blow. She'd worked with grieving children before, hell, she'd been a grieving child. But hearing it from this small boy in his empty castle, she understood. This wasn't about food. This was about trust. About whether love was worth the risk when love could be taken away without warning. No, sweetheart, Nina said softly. I'm not going anywhere. That's what they all say. Nico's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. Mama said she wasn't going anywhere either. Behind her, Nina heard Gabrielle's sharp intake of breath. You're right to be careful, Nina continued, holding Nico's gaze. You're right not to trust promises. But I want you to know something, I'm here because I want to be here. And I'm going to do everything I can to take good care of you. Nico studied her for another long moment. Then, barely perceptible, he nodded. Okay. But I don't eat dinner anymore. Nico, Gabrielle's voice carried a warning edge. It's true, Papa. I don't like food. Nina felt the pieces clicking into place. The refusal to eat wasn't about appetite, it was about control. The one thing Nico could still decide in a world that had taken everything else from him. That's okay, Nina said, and both father and son looked at her in surprise. We don't have to worry about dinner right now. Maybe Luna and I can just spend time getting to know you first. Gabrielle stared at her like she'd spoken in tongues. Miss Moreau, Nico needs to eat. He's lost weight, Mr. Montanari. Nina stood, meeting his gaze directly, and saw his eyes flash with something dangerous. Could I speak with you privately? He nodded curtly. Nico, show Luna your room. Mrs. Chen will bring juice and cookies. As the children headed upstairs, Luna chattering nervously, Nico silent, Gabriel led Nina into his study. The room was all dark wood and leather, built to intimidate. Gabriel moved behind his aircraft carrier-sized desk, and Nina understood she was being evaluated. In his world, trust was a luxury that could get you killed. Miss Morrow, he began, his voice taking on the edge that probably made grown men tremble. I've had 5 nannies in 6 months. Each promised they could help. Each failed. Your son isn't refusing to eat because he's being difficult. Nina interrupted, then immediately regretted it when Gabrielle's eyes went cold. But she pushed forward. He's grieving. Food represents comfort, love, connection. By refusing it, he's protecting himself from feeling things that remind him of what he's lost. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the city he controlled. The doctor said he's physically healthy. I'm not talking about his body, Mr. Montanari. I'm talking about his heart. When Gabriel turned back, Nina saw something vulnerable flicker across his features before the mask slammed back into place. What do you suggest? Give me time. Let me earn his trust. And maybe. Nina hesitated, then pushed forward. Maybe you could tell me about his mother. What she was like. What made her special. She paused. Especially what she liked to cook. Gabrielle's entire body went rigid. That's not, we don't discuss, Mr. Montanari, Nina said gently. I think the reason Nico won't eat isn't because he doesn't want to. It's because no one's cooking the food that feels like love. The silence stretched between them like a bridge over dangerous water. Finally, Gabriel spoke, his voice rough. Osso buco. Every Sunday. She'd make osso buco with risotto. Nico would stand on a chair beside her, helping stir. His jaw clenched. He hasn't asked for it once since she died. Nina understood. Because asking would mean remembering. And remembering hurts too much. Yes. The single word carried the weight of 6 months of grief. What if, Nina said carefully, what if I cooked it? Not to replace her, no one could do that. But to show Nico that love doesn't end just because the person who taught us how to love is gone. Gabrielle stared at her for so long that Nina thought she'd overstepped. That she'd be fired before she'd even started. But then he nodded, once, sharp. Try. But Miss Morrow, his eyes met hers, and Nina saw the warning there. If you hurt my son, there isn't a place in this world you could hide from me. Nina believed him. But she also believed that sometimes, the most dangerous men were that way because they loved too deeply and had lost too much. I won't hurt him, she promised. I'll protect him like he's my own. And in that moment, standing in Gabriel Montanari's study, Nina made a promise she didn't yet understand would change everything. But what happened next? That's where the Real story begins. ACT 3, The Resurrection, 8:15 to 14:30, 3 days into her employment, Nina learned the geography of grief. Gabriel left every morning at 7 sharp, returning after 9 at night. The staff was terrified of him but fiercely loyal. Nico spent most of his time in his room, emerging only when Luna coaxed him out. And the kitchen was a shrine to a woman who was no longer there. Mrs. Chen, Nina said on her 4th morning, watching the housekeeper prepare another untouched breakfast tray. Tell me about Mrs. Montanari. The older woman's hands stilled. Mr. Gabriel doesn't like us to talk about the missus. I know. But Nico is wasting away, and I think the key to bringing him back is understanding what he's lost. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. That boy, he's disappearing. 6 months, barely eating. The doctors say nothing's wrong, but I see him getting smaller every day. Nina nodded toward the cookbooks lining the kitchen shelf, their spines worn from use. Were those hers? Oh yes. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Mrs. Sophia, she loved to cook. Not fancy food like the chef makes. Simple food. Comfort food. She said cooking was how you put love into someone's belly. What was Nico's favorite? Osso buco, Mrs. Chen said without hesitation. Every Sunday. The whole house would smell like heaven. Little Nico would stand on his chair, helping stir the risotto. Her voice broke. He hasn't asked for it once since she's gone. Nina felt the final piece click into place. Mrs. Chen, do you think Mr. Montanari would mind if I cooked dinner tonight? The housekeeper looked skeptical. He's very particular about Nico's meals. What if it was osso buco? Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. You know how to make it? My grandmother was Italian, Nina said, which was only partly true. She'd learned from a cookbook when she was young and desperate to create love through food. I'd need to shop for ingredients. I'll come with you, Mrs. Chen said decisively. I know where Mrs. Sophia shopped. That afternoon, while Luna and Nico played, Luna's chatter slowly drawing him out of his shell, Nina found herself on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, following Mrs. Chen through the Italian market where Sophia Montanari had been a beloved regular. Mrs. Chen. The butcher, a round man with flour-dusted hands, beamed at them. How's little Nico? We miss seeing him with his mama. He's adjusting, Mrs. Chen said carefully. This is Miss Nina, the new nanny. The butcher's expression grew serious as he studied Nina. You cook for the boy? I'm going to try. Then you need the best. He disappeared into the back and returned with veal shanks that looked like they belonged in a culinary magazine. For Mrs. Sophia, I always save the best cuts. For her boy, I do the same. As they gathered ingredients, San Marzano tomatoes, arborio rice, fresh herbs, good wine, Nina heard story after story about Sophia Montanari. How she'd insisted on shopping herself despite having staff. How she'd known every vendor by name. How she'd light up talking about her son. She was pregnant again, Mrs. Chen said quietly as they walked back to the car. 3 months. So happy. Planning to tell Mr. Gabriel on their anniversary. Nina's heart clenched. The cancer came so fast. By the time they found it. Mrs. Chen wiped her eyes. She made me promise not to tell him about the baby. Said she didn't want his last memories to be about another loss. Nina understood then. Nico wasn't just grieving his mother, he was carrying the weight of a future that would never exist. Back at the penthouse, Nina sent the children to play while she took over the kitchen. Mrs. Chen hovered nearby, offering guidance as Nina began the slow, meditative process of creating osso buco the way Sophia had made it. The veal shank seared until golden. The sofrito of onions, carrots, and celery filled the kitchen with the smell of home. When Nina added the wine, the sizzle and steam carried memories, her own grandmother's kitchen, the way food could be a bridge between past and present. It smells right, Mrs. Chen said approvingly. Mrs. Sophia always said you cook with your heart first, hands second. As the osso buco braised slowly, Nina started the risotto. This was the tricky part, constant stirring, each ladle of broth added slowly, patiently. Meditation and art and love all stirred together. She was so focused that she didn't hear the small footsteps until a voice said, "That smells like Mama." Nina turned. Nico stood in the doorway, his dark eyes wide and uncertain. Luna was beside him, her hand protective on his shoulder. "Does it?" Nina asked gently, continuing to stir. "Mrs. Chen told me your mama made the best osso buco in New York." Nico stepped closer, drawn by the familiar aroma. "She let me help with the rice. Said stirring was the most important job because you had to put love into every circle." Nina's throat tightened. "Would you like to help me stir?" For a moment, she thought he might run. But then Nico nodded and climbed onto the step stool, his mother's step stool. Nina handed him the wooden spoon, her hands guiding his small ones. Like this? Perfect. Your mama taught you well. They stirred together in comfortable silence, Luna watching from nearby. The kitchen filled with warmth and the promise of a meal made with love. Miss Nina? Nico's voice was soft. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Mama can smell it? Wherever she is. Nina's vision blurred. I think love has a way of traveling anywhere it needs to go. Nico nodded solemnly and kept stirring, putting love into every circle, just like his mother had taught him. And upstairs, neither of them knew that Gabriel Montanari had come home early, drawn by reports from his security team about unusual activity. Neither knew he was standing in the doorway, frozen, as the smell of his wife's osso buco filled the penthouse for the first time in 6 months. Neither knew that the most feared man in New York had tears streaming down his face. ACT 4, The Breaking, 1430 to 2000 hours, when Gabriel Montanari stepped into his kitchen that evening and saw his son eating, not picking, not pushing food around, but actually taking real bites and asking for seconds, something inside him cracked wide open. Nico sat at the kitchen island, chattering with Luna about dinosaurs while Nina served them more risotto. The scene was so normal, so beautifully mundane, that it felt like a hallucination. Papa. Nico's face lit up, actually lit up, when he saw his father. Miss Nina made Mama's osso buco. It tastes just like hers. Gabrielle's throat felt like sandpaper. Does it? Want to try? Nico held out his fork with the generosity that only children possessed, offering his father a bite of the first meal he'd enjoyed in 6 months. Gabrielle looked at the fork. At his son's hopeful face. At Nina, who was watching him with those impossibly blue eyes that seemed to see straight through his armor. He could refuse. Could maintain the walls he'd built around Sophia's memory. Could keep the grief locked away where it couldn't hurt him anymore. Instead, he crossed the kitchen and accepted the bite. The taste hit him like a bullet to the chest. It was exactly like Sophia's. The rich, complex flavor. The tender meat. The love stirred into every ingredient. For a moment, he could almost hear her laugh. Almost feel her presence. Almost believe that if he turned around, she'd be there with flower in her hair and that smile that had made him believe he could be more than what his father's empire demanded. It's perfect, he managed, his voice rougher than broken glass. Nico beamed. Miss Nina let me help stir. I remembered, love in every circle. Gabrielle's eyes locked on Nina's. She stood there, this woman who'd walked into their broken home and somehow started piecing it back together, and he felt something he hadn't felt since Sophia died. Hope. Where did you learn to cook like this? The question came out harsher than he intended. My grandmother, Nina said quietly. She always said food was the language of love. Sophia used to say the same thing. The words escaped before Gabrielle could stop them. Nina's expression softened with understanding. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. Gabrielle cleared his throat, fighting for control. Nico, you should finish your dinner. But Papa, can't we eat together? Like we used to. The request was so simple. So innocent. And yet it felt like Nico was asking Gabrielle to walk through fire. Family dinners had been Sophia's domain. Her time to weave them together with stories and laughter and the kind of warmth that made a house a home. I have work, please, Papa. Those dark eyes, Sophia's eyes, looked up at him with such hope that Gabrielle felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. He looked at Nina, who was quietly cleaning up but clearly listening. This wasn't his world anymore. His world was cold decisions and colder consequences, blood and money and the kind of power that came with a price he was still paying. But Nico was looking at him like he used to, before grief built canyons between them. All right, Gabrielle heard himself say. One dinner. The smile that spread across Nico's face was brighter than every chandelier in the penthouse combined. Nina quickly set another place, not in the formal dining room with its massive table that made conversation impossible, but in the cozy breakfast nook where Sophia had insisted they eat as a family. As Gabriel ate osso buco that tasted like his dead wife's love, listening to his son laugh with Luna while Nina served them with quiet grace, he realized something terrifying: he was falling for his son's nanny. And in his world, that was the most dangerous appetite of all. ACT 5, The Debt Collector, 20:00-26:45, for 3 weeks, Sunday osso buco became a tradition that Gabriel both craved and feared. He found himself rushing home from meetings, drawn by the promise of his son's laughter and the dangerous comfort of Nina's presence. He started noticing things he shouldn't: the way her eyes lit up when she talked to the children, the graceful movement of her hands as she cooked, the soft French lullabies she hummed when she thought no one was listening. It was dangerous because Nico was healing, and Gabriel was terrified of what would happen if Nina left. It was dangerous because Gabriel was beginning to feel things he'd buried with his wife. "Mr. Gabriel," Mrs. Chen said one Tuesday morning. "We need to discuss Miss Nina's salary." Gabriel paused in adjusting his tie. "Is there a problem? She hasn't cashed a single paycheck." Gabriel frowned. "What do you mean?" 3 weeks. 3 paychecks. All sitting in her room, unopened. In Gabriel's world, people who didn't take money were either dangerously idealistic or dangerously calculating. Neither option was acceptable when it came to someone who had access to his son. "Have Marco run a deeper background check," he instructed his head of security. "I want to know everything. Where she came from, why she's here, what she's hiding." But even as he gave the order, Gabriel felt guilt twist in his chest. Nina had brought life back to Nico's eyes. Did it matter what secrets she was keeping if the result was his son's happiness? That evening, Gabriel came home to find chaos. Luna was crying in the living room while Nico tried awkwardly to comfort her. Nina was nowhere to be seen. "What happened?" Gabriel demanded, immediately scanning for threats. "Luna fell off her bike," Nico explained, his voice serious. "She scraped her knee really bad. Miss Nina carried her all the way home, but then some men came to the door and Miss Nina got really scared and told us to stay here." Gabriel's blood turned to ice. "What men? Where is Miss Nina?" "In her room. She's been crying." Gabriel took the stairs 3 at a time, his hand automatically moving to the gun concealed beneath his jacket. He found Nina's door slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see her sitting on her bed, staring at papers spread before her. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. He knocked softly. "Nina. May I come in?" She looked up quickly, trying to wipe away tears. "Mr. Montanari, I'm sorry. I should be with the children, they're fine." Gabriel stepped into the room, his eyes cataloging details. The space was sparse, neat. A photo of Nina and Luna at what looked like a graduation. A small stack of books in French. And on the bed, the papers that had made her cry. "What happened today?" Nina's composure cracked. "Debt collectors. They found me." She gestured helplessly at the papers. "I thought I had more time, but they're demanding full payment by the end of the month or they'll take legal action. They said they'd contact my employer." Her eyes met his, desperate and terrified. "I can't lose this job, Mr. Montanari. Luna and I have nowhere else to go." Gabriel felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the woman who'd saved his son. "How much do you owe?" $60,000. Nina's voice was barely a whisper. "My father's cancer treatment. The insurance didn't cover everything. I couldn't let him die because we couldn't afford the experimental therapy that might save him." "Did it save him?" Nina's face crumpled. "For 6 months. Then he died anyway and left me with debt I'll never be able to pay and a daughter who asks why Grandpa had to go to heaven when the doctors said they could make him better. Gabriel understood debt. He understood impossible choices. But more than that, he understood what it meant to lose someone you'd sacrifice everything to save. The paychecks, he said quietly. Mrs. Chen said you haven't cashed them. I was afraid, Nina admitted. Afraid that if I put them in my account, the collectors would take them before I could use them for Luna's needs. I've been paying for everything in cash, trying to make it last. Gabriel pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. Within minutes, Marco appeared in the doorway. Sir. I need you to handle a debt collection issue, Gabriel said, his voice taking on the cold edge that made grown men nervous. $60,000 owed to Mercy General Hospital and Pinnacle Financial Services. Consider it handled, Marco said immediately. Tonight? Tonight. As Marco disappeared, Nina stared at Gabriel in shock. What did you just do? I solved a problem. Mr. Montanari, I can't let you, you can and you will. Gabriel's tone brooked no argument. You work for me now. My employees don't get harassed by debt collectors. Nina stood abruptly, pacing to the window. You don't understand. I'm not a charity case. I'm not some helpless woman who needs rescuing. No, Gabriel agreed, watching her carefully. You're a woman who sacrificed everything for someone she loved. Who took a job she was overqualified for to provide for her daughter. Who brought my son back from the edge of despair. He paused. You're a lot of things, Nina. But helpless isn't one of them. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Why? Why would you do this for me? Gabriel stepped closer. Close enough to see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. Close enough to catch the faint scent of vanilla that always seemed to surround her. Because 3 weeks ago, my son was disappearing before my eyes and I was powerless to stop it. Because you walked into our lives and gave him a reason to smile again. He paused, the words catching in his throat. Because I haven't seen him this happy since his mother died. Mr. Montanari, Gabriel, he corrected softly. My name is Gabriel. Nina looked up at him, and Gabriel felt something dangerous stir in his chest. She was beautiful, yes. But it was more than that. She was light in a world that had been dark for too long. Gabriel, she whispered, and the sound of his name on her lips sent heat racing through his veins. For a moment, they stood frozen. The air between them charged with possibility and danger and the kind of attraction that could destroy everything they'd built. Then Luna's voice echoed up the stairs, Miss Nina. Nico wants to know if we can have hot chocolate. The spell broke. Nina stepped back, composing herself. I should go to them. Nina, Gabriel called as she reached the door. She paused, not trusting herself to turn around. The debt is gone. You're safe here. Both of you. She nodded, unable to speak, and disappeared down the hallway. Gabriel stood alone in her room, surrounded by the scent of vanilla, and the dangerous realization that somewhere between the osso buco and the laughter, he'd started falling for his son's nanny. And in his world, that was a complication that could get everyone he loved killed. But what neither of them knew was that Vincent Rossini had been watching. Waiting. Planning his move. And when he struck, it would be with the kind of violence that would force Gabriel to choose between protecting his empire and protecting the woman who'd become his salvation. ACT 6, The Attack, 26:45-33:30, the attack came on a Thursday evening, swift and brutal as a winter storm. Gabriel was in his study reviewing security reports when the first gunshot shattered the penthouse's peaceful silence. His blood turned to ice as he heard Nina scream from upstairs, followed by Nico's terrified cry. Stay down. Gabriel roared, grabbing his gun from the desk drawer as he raced toward the stairs. Marco. Marco was already there with 3 security guards, forming a protective barrier around the staircase. Rossini family, Marco reported grimly. 6 men, maybe more. They breached the lobby. Gabriel's jaw clenched. Vincent Rossini had been making moves against Montanari territory for months, but Gabriel never imagined he'd be bold enough to attack his home. His family. Where are the children? Safe room with Miss Nina, Marco confirmed. But sir, they're trapped upstairs. We need to clear a path. Another volley of gunshots echoed through the penthouse. Gabriel's mind raced through possibilities, each one ending in blood. His blood, he could accept. But not Nico's. Not Nina's. Not Luna's. Call for backup, Gabriel ordered. And get me a clear line to the safe room. Upstairs, Nina held both children close in the reinforced panic room Gabriel had installed after Nico's birth. The space was equipped with everything: food, water, medical supplies, communications equipment, but it felt like a tomb. Miss Nina, Nico whispered, his body trembling. Are the bad men here for Papa? Nina's heart broke at the fear in his voice. Your Papa is very strong, sweetheart. He's going to keep us all safe. But what if they hurt him like they hurt Mama? The question hit Nina like a physical blow. She'd learned from Mrs. Chen that Sophia hadn't died of natural causes. The cancer had been triggered by slow-acting poison, a message from Gabriel's enemies that no one he loved was safe. That's not going to happen, Nina said fiercely. I won't let it. The communication system crackled to life, and Gabriel's voice filled the small space. Nina. Are you all there? We're here, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The children are scared but unharmed. Good. Listen carefully. There's a secondary exit from the safe room behind the bookshelf on the east wall. It leads to the service elevator. I need you to take the children and get out of the building. There was a pause that lasted too long. What about you? I'll handle things here. Nina understood what he wasn't saying. Gabriel was planning to stay and fight, probably to the death, to give them time to escape. The same way he'd been planning to sacrifice himself for his family since the day his wife died. No, Nina said firmly. Nina, this isn't a discussion. You're right. It's not. Nina stood up, her mind made up. Nico, Luna, I need you both to be very brave. Miss Nina, Gabriel's voice was sharp with warning. Do not. Nina switched off the communication system and turned to the children. Nico, your papa taught you about the security system, didn't he? Nico nodded, wiping his eyes. He said I should know how to protect myself. Good. I need you to activate the lockdown protocol for the entire building. Can you do that? Nico's eyes widened with understanding. The lockdown would trap the attackers inside, cutting off their escape routes. But Papa said only to use it in emergencies. This is an emergency, sweetheart. Your Papa needs our help. While Nico worked at the security panel with the focused intensity he'd inherited from his father, Nina turned to Luna. Baby, I need you to stay here with Nico. No matter what happens, you don't leave this room unless Nico's Papa or I come to get you personally. Understand? Luna nodded solemnly. Are you going to fight the bad men? I'm going to protect our family, Nina said, and realized as she said it that somewhere along the way, that's exactly what they'd become. A family. The lockdown activated with a series of mechanical clicks and whirs. Throughout the building, steel barriers slammed down over windows and exits. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red. The attackers were now trapped inside with Gabriel and his men. Exactly where Gabriel wanted them. Nina kissed both children and slipped out through the hidden exit, her heart pounding as she made her way through the service corridors toward the main penthouse. She could hear gunfire. Shouting. The sounds of war being fought in the place that had become her home. She found Gabriel pinned down behind an overturned table in the living room, blood seeping from a graze on his temple. 2 of his men were down. Marco was reloading with grim efficiency. "What the hell are you doing here?" Gabriel snarled when he saw her. "Saving your life," Nina replied, crawling to his side. "The children activated the lockdown. The attackers are trapped." Gabriel's eyes flashed with fury and admiration. "I told you to get them out, and leave you to die." "Not happening." Nina grabbed a spare gun from one of the fallen guards, checking the clip with movements that made Gabriel stare. "My father wasn't just a cancer patient, Gabriel. He was military. Special forces. He taught me things." Before Gabriel could respond, Nina was moving. Using the furniture for cover, she flanked the remaining attackers. Her shots were precise, controlled, taking down 2 men before they even realized she was there. The battle was over in minutes. When the smoke cleared, Vincent Rossini lay dead in Gabriel's foyer, his remaining men either dead or wounded. Gabriel stood in the wreckage of his living room, staring at Nina like he'd never seen her before. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Nina set down the gun, her hands finally starting to shake. "My father was special forces before he got sick. He said a woman should know how to protect what matters to her." Gabriel stepped closer, his eyes intense. "And what matters to you, Nina?" She looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd become her salvation, who'd shown her that love could bloom even in the darkest soil. "You," she whispered. "You and Nico and the life we've built together. I love you, Gabriel. I love your son. I love the family we've become." Gabriel's control finally snapped. He pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted of desperation and relief and the kind of love worth fighting for. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," Gabriel said against her lips. "God help me, I love you too. Papa." Nico's voice echoed through the penthouse as he and Luna emerged from the safe room, running toward them with tears of relief. Gabriel caught his son in his arms while Nina hugged Luna close. They stood there in the ruins of the old life, holding each other tight, knowing they'd found something worth more than all the money and power in the world. "You belong to me now," Gabriel murmured against Nina's ear, the words both a promise and a claim. "You and Luna both. You're mine to protect. Mine to love. Mine to keep safe. And you belong to us," Nina replied, her hand finding his. "All of us." As sirens wailed in the distance and Marco coordinated the cleanup, the Montanari family, expanded now by love and choice rather than just blood, held each other close and planned for a future that would be built on more than just survival. It would be built on love stirred into every moment. Love in every circle. Epilogue, 5 years later, 33 to 30-37 to 00, the kitchen of the Montanari estate in the Hamptons was filled with the familiar sounds of Sunday dinner preparation. Nina stood at the stove, stirring risotto with the same wooden spoon Sophia had once used, while Gabriel sat at the island helping their 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, named for the woman who'd started it all, crack eggs for pasta. "Careful, Principessa," Gabriel murmured, guiding little Sophia's hands. Just like that. Nico, now 12 and tall for his age, was teaching Luna how to properly season the osso buco. At 16, Luna had inherited her mother's grace and her stepfather's protective instincts, especially when it came to her younger siblings. "Remember," Nico said seriously, "Mama always said cooking is about putting love into every ingredient." Nina smiled, her heart full as she watched her blended family work together. The penthouse in the city had been sold after the attack, replaced by this sprawling estate where children could run free and Sunday dinners could last for hours without the weight of danger pressing down. Gabriel had stepped back from the darker aspects of his business, focusing instead on legitimate enterprises. He was still powerful, still dangerous when needed, but now he was also a man who coached Little League and attended school plays and never missed a bedtime story. "Dinner's ready," Nina announced. As they gathered around a large farmhouse table, the one that had replaced the formal dining room of their old life, Nina caught Gabriel's eye across the table. He smiled. That soft, genuine smile he reserved only for his family. And mouthed the words that had become their daily promise, Ti amo. I love you. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the aroma of osso buco, Nina knew that some recipes were worth more than ingredients and technique. Some recipes were made of love, loss, healing, and hope. Some recipes could save a family. And as Nico helped little Sofia stir the risotto, teaching her the same lesson his mother had taught him years ago, love in every circle, Nina understood that Sofia Montanari's legacy hadn't died with her. It lived on in every meal they shared. In every laugh that echoed through their home. In every moment they chose love over fear. Because that's what family does. They cook love into every circle. They protect what matters. And they never, ever let go. Final frame, the camera pulls back slowly, showing the Montanari family gathered around their table, bathed in golden evening light streaming through the windows. In the background, barely visible, hangs a photo of Sofia Montanari, smiling, radiant, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Watching over the family she saved by teaching a little boy that love, once stirred into the heart, never truly disappears. It just keeps circling. Forever.